When you think of World War I, you probably picture grinding trench warfare, right? Battles that dragged on for months, costing hundreds of thousands of lives for just a few feet of muddy ground. But what if I told you that in the summer of 1918, one battle completely flipped that script? A battle that created the blueprint for victory, and it was all over in less time than it takes to watch a movie.
93 minutes. Just let that sink in. That was the official time from the moment the troops went over the top to the final objective being captured. In a war that was all about years of bloody stalemate, a number like that, well, it was nothing short of revolutionary.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth, in the middle of this infamous war of attrition, did one commander pull off a victory with such breathtaking speed and efficiency? The answer, it turns out, is a story of absolutely brilliant planning and a totally new way of thinking about war.
All right, let's set the scene. It's the middle of 1918. The Germans' massive spring offensive has just punched a really dangerous bulge, or salient, into the Allied lines on the Somme. And this bulge created a serious problem that needed a very, very clever solution.
You see, this bulge around the little village of La Hummel was a constant thorn in the Allied side. The Germans held the high ground so they could see everything and shell Allied positions for miles. It was also a launching pad for them to threaten the super-important city of Amiens. Taking it was absolutely essential, but a classic head-on assault would have been a complete bloodbath. On the one hand, you had the standard playbook for World War I. Just throw waves and waves of soldiers into machine gun fire. It was brutal, it was predictable, and it was horrifically wasteful. But on the other hand, you have the vision of the man tasked with fixing this Hamel problem, Lieutenant General John Monash. His idea was completely different. He wanted a symphony of forces, not just brute force. And above all else, he wanted to protect the lives of his men.
And this is the guy. John Monash was not your typical stuffy general. Before the war, he was a civilian engineer in Australia, which meant he thought differently. He saw things in terms of logistics, coordination, and solving complex problems. But his background made him an outsider, and he was constantly dealing with politics. In fact, get this, the Australian Prime Minister showed up at his headquarters just 2 days before the attack with the full intention of firing him. It was only after hearing other top officers sing Monash's praises that he changed his mind. Talk about a close call.
So what was this incredible plan that not only saved his job but also helped change the course of the war? Well, it all centered on this one powerful idea: a perfectly synchronized attack using every single weapon available.
The official term for it is combined arms. It sounds kind of simple today, but back in 1918, it was radical. It didn't just mean having tanks and planes and artillery on the same battlefield. It meant having them all work together as one, perfectly timed, devastating weapon. Kind of like a symphony orchestra with him as the conductor.
So here are the key instruments in Monash's orchestra. First, the artillery would create this moving wall of explosions, a creeping barrage that crawled just ahead of the infantry, forcing the Germans to keep their heads down. Second, the new, more reliable Mark V tanks would roll forward with the soldiers, like their own personal bodyguards. Third, the infantry just had to follow this screen of steel and fire and clean up what was left. And finally, planes would bomb the enemy from above and then fly over the captured ground, dropping fresh ammo by parachute right where it was needed.
And the level of detail here is just, wow. This wasn't just some idea on a map. To make sure everyone was on the same page, Monash had the Australian infantry and the British tank crews literally live and train together for weeks so they'd know exactly how to work with each other. The tanks were even painted with specific symbols to match the infantry unit they were supporting. And get this psychological trick. For 2 weeks, the artillery fired smoke shells at the exact same time every morning, conditioning the Germans to a false alarm. So on the real day, the enemy just thought, oh, it's just the daily smoke, and didn't take it seriously. Genius.
The logistics were also a game changer. Monash used a few tanks just to carry supplies forward. The amount of gear those few tanks could carry was the same as what it would take 1,200 soldiers to haul by hand. That freed up hundreds of men from grunt work so they could actually fight. It was a massive force multiplier.
Okay, so the plan is set. The troops have rehearsed it to perfection. The stage was finally set for the attack to go ahead on July 4th, 1918. And that date, it was chosen for a very specific reason. That's right. For the first time in history, American troops were going to fight under a foreign command. Monash deliberately chose their Independence Day as a sign of respect.
Now, there was some last-minute drama when the American commander, General Pershing, found out and ordered his men pulled out. But Monash protested, other generals backed him up, and in the end, 4 American companies went into battle with the Australians. History was made.
And just look at how fast this all went down. At 3:10 in the morning, the real attack starts. The barrage rolls. The infantry and tanks move out. By 3:45, less than an hour in, major German positions had already fallen. And by 4:43 a.m., just 93 minutes after it all started, it was over. The battle was won. A stunning, lightning-fast victory.
It all came together perfectly. That conditioning firing worked like a charm. The Germans put on their clunky gas masks, which limited their vision and hearing. As the Australians moved through tall crops, their machine gunners actually stood up and fired from the hip to keep the enemy pinned down. Whenever a German machine gun nest caused trouble, a tank would just rumble over and crush it. And overhead, planes were already dropping supplies to the troops on their brand new objectives. It was Monash's orchestra, playing in perfect harmony.
And even within this incredible plan, you still had amazing acts of individual courage. Guys like Henry Dalziel and Thomas Axford, who both single-handedly took out machine gun posts, were each awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for bravery.
The fighting was over in a flash, but its impact, its shockwaves, were just getting started. This 93-minute victory at Hamel wasn't just some small local success. It was a revolution in how to fight a war.
I mean, just look at the numbers. The Allies took about 1,400 casualties. The Germans, on the other hand, had around 2,000 killed or wounded, and an incredible 1,600 were taken prisoner. The Allies had achieved every single one of their goals, hammered the enemy, and did it with way fewer casualties than anyone expected. That is the definition of a total victory.
So why does this one small battle matter so much? Because Hamel was the dress rehearsal. It was the proof that this new way of fighting worked. Monash's tactics were immediately studied, copied, and scaled up just a month later for the huge Battle of Amiens, the battle that finally broke the German army's will to fight and kicked off the 100 Days offensive that ended World War I.
The guy who was almost fired right before the battle would go on to be seen as one of the war's greatest minds. Years later, another pretty famous general, Bernard Montgomery from World War II, paid Monash this incredible compliment, sealing his legacy as a true innovator.
You know, the story of Hamel is so much more than just military history. It's a timeless lesson. It teaches us that when you're up against a seemingly impossible problem, the answer isn't always more brute force. Sometimes it's better planning, it's smarter coordination, and it's having the courage to try something completely new. It really proves that a well-conducted symphony of innovation can be far more powerful than just the loud, grinding noise of attrition.